People often think of Panama as being north-south because it connects North and South America, but in fact Panama runs east-west, as you can see there. The east of Panama is a rainforest area with good soils. The very far border of Colombia can't be accessed due to insurgent activity. That area there in the east is a little drier. There's some wetter areas along the Atlantic coast in central Panama, and that again supports a different flora. The east, which is up near Costa Rica there, is incredibly wet. I stayed there in a research station, and they continually ran humidifiers and generally emptied several litres a day. There are a couple of select areas also covered. One of the main ones is near the capital, Panama City, which is called Cerro Jefe. It's a highly botanised area, along with Barrow, the island there where the Smithsonian is. And Cerro Jefe has a lot of endemics. It's a little elevated, very windswept, and the plants that you see there will demonstrate this with their thick leaves. Then we do a little bit in Bocas del Toro, which is up there on the Caribbean Sea, on the Costa Rican side there. Bocas del Toro meaning the mouth of the bull. And there are many aroids there that actually grow right on the seaside and on rocks beside the coast, and they constantly have seawater splashing on them. So there's quite a few aroids which are salt tolerant for those landscapers that are in the room that are looking for something for Port Douglas or Sydney or wherever. Mission Beach, yes. Yeah. So everyone can get a go. As the talk is on Aroids of Panama, I've tried to cover most of the genera that I've seen there. Some of these genera may not be familiar to a lot of you. I've also covered a lot of species that are not really unicorns, because I think when you collect in the environment that we do, people get tied up in the Wacryanums and the beachies and one thing and another, all the well-known species that are very striking, but there's a lot of other species that aren't nearly as striking, but they all have their interest one way or another. So there's a lot of slides to get through, so we'll be moving along a bit. The talk's going to be recorded, so you'll be able to access it at some stage or another in the future, and you'll be able to go back and have a look at it. The naming is to the best of our ability, and it will be revised as we progress through life, and some of the names will change. A lot of them are still under discussion, and some of them haven't even been described yet. So strap yourself in, take your amphetamines, here we go. You still got to go fast. This is a quick list of the genera that you can find there, and this is a couple of years old. And for example, Monstera apparently is now up in the hundreds, but as you can see, Anthurium really dominates the picture there. So, Anthuriums of eastern Panama. This is a new leaf on the Garriganum, which was the red leaf on the title page, and this is a freshly emerged and hardened off leaf there. As you can see, it's quite a considerable size. There it is, truly epiphytic. If you have trouble growing it in a pot, put it on a pole or a tree. You can see the yellow inflorescence in the background, which is the characteristic of it. This species belongs to the subsignatum complex and has been divided up in recent times. This is an unnamed Anthurium, but just to demonstrate, there'll be quite a few little unnamed ones which just demonstrate the variety that you will find there. This is probably watermelonense, and here we've got Impolitum. You can see the Monstera down there. Often when you're standing in an area, you might be able to count between 20 and 30 aroids just within your visual area. Another unnamed species there. There's lots of little rosette species. Some of these are yet to be described. Some of them are actually difficult to tell, and whether they're actually even philodendrons or anthuriums. This is Anthurium fragment. Sorry, let me just go back one. Anthurium fragmentissimum. It's got that very characteristic long pendulous inflorescence there. Most people sort of tend to ignore the bird's nest species, but as you can see, they do have their attraction, particularly when you look up from a bottom. The venation is quite marked and strong. Another species which is yet to be named. You can see the characteristic white inflorescence there. Back one. Another species which is yet to be described. This is probably a juvenile Rhodospatix, and this comes from Sterohepi. Again, Sterohepi, the area with all the endemics. Anthuriums, we all tend to think they grow rather slowly, but as you can see from this log, it can't have been there forever, and there's a well-established anthurium on it, along with a Guzmania, and you find all these things growing together. Again, marked venation. I'm not sure that anyone can put this in a genus. I've showed it to a few people. If you do look there, there is a very slight marginal vein there, but it may even be possible that it's a monstera. That's Anthurium Rhodospatix, but a juvenile, so the flower isn't very big. You can see the Rhodospatix there and the white spathe. Again, a Sterohepi species. This is in the subsignatum complex as well, and it's rotundi lobatum. As you can see, the lobes aren't quite as round, and the central lobe is a little bit more pointed and narrow. This looks like Frederick Stylii, but it may in fact be a different species to that. It may well be one of the species that ants colonise. Some of these species that I'm showing now may have been brought into the country by Bruce in the past, and there's quite a nice little collection of sort of rosette species there. The foliage is quite attractive. Again, different to the previous. And I think we all know what this species is. And when it grows nicely, clavigerum. Anthurium clavigerum. Again, another species. So growing out in the sun, we get that coloured leaf. When we throw it into a shadow, we get quite a nice blue colour to it. Right, so this is Anthurium Cune aliense, rightio, named for the Cuna Indians down in eastern Panama. Used to be mistaken for Dressleri. Looks very similar, but may be in fact a new species which has been described at the moment called Pseudo-Dressleri. But this is to be determined too. No one can quite put their a name on this one, but it's thought perhaps to be a hybrid with Rio clariense. But again, quite attractive new leaf there with the veining. And obviously attractive to the insects which have eaten out the one corner. Again, another unnamed species. And that's the inflorescence to the previous species. Again, up on Sterohepi, and the leaves, although you can't quite see it there, are quite thick. And here we've got Anthurium tysonii, and the petioles there are quite ridged. Inflorescence right there in the centre of the image. Again, Sarohefi, growing on one of the fan palms there. Fantastic species there. Anthurium supraglandium, that's in the bicollectivum complex. And at the moment, they're dividing that group of plants up into several species as well. An amazing little miniature Anthurium. Certainly a different texture to that leaf. And from Sarohefi again, as you can see there, lots of cyclants in this place, lots of narrow-leafed bromeliads, and this Anthurium is Anthurium hefiense. You can see it right at the base of that cyclanth there. Again, another miniature. The Monstera are being renamed at the moment. And here's one of our old favourites probably. Everyone will have their opinion on what it is. I won't want to argue with anyone. Possibly Monstera donosoiense. Another Monstera. This is just in the wrong place, this slide, but this is Dieffenbachia, probably Longispatha. Gets a huge leaf at times, which can be like up to about 8 feet long. As you can see, there's a little insect damage to it, making it look not unlike a Monstera. Now for some philodendrons. Let's go back one. Philodendron wendlandii. Now this is not the usual form that's in cultivation, but as you can see there, no margin. Actually looks like an Anthurium, no marginal vein. Very nice, attractive thing when growing on a tree. Totally different shape to the leaf to the species that we're used to. This probably belongs in that tenui complex, and again, unable to be identified. Another philo, and Syngonium, erythrophyllum. Very nice underside to the leaf there. Again, another unidentified philodendron. And more so. Another philodendron. You can see the leaves, you can see the inflorescences right up the top of the image there on the trunk. Superficially, if you looked at it, you'd probably think it was Anthurium clavigerum. Or unidentified philodendrons. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to get a name on this one, but this grows down a famous collecting road in eastern Panama called the Lanicati Road, which was the furthest that you could get to the east towards Colombia, but the insurgency down there didn't allow people to go along any further. And the Kuna Indians, who have their reserve down there, didn't let people go right through to the Atlantic coast. I do believe that road is now opened up. And this grows down there with the fantastic yellow furry helicona. And here we are, we've got a fantastic philodendron. There it is, climbing the tree. Again, unable to put a name on this species. As you can see in the picture there, more aroids down on this other trunk, higher on the trunk there. the place really is just loaded with aroids. And an old favourite, this is the place where all gygasses come from, this road. There's no other locality for it. The species that Chris seeded and distributed around the world actually came out of a botanical garden in Hawaii, but this is where it was collected. Again, another unidentified philodendron. As you can see, a few little insects there, and it must have looks like it's got pollen in there from being brought in by insects the previous evening. Side view of the inflorescence. This again is down the Lani-Kati Road. When I first collected this, it was referred to as Homelimena panamense. Whether that's still the name or not. Oh, well, it's adenoma now, but whether it's still panamense or they've lumped it in with something else, I'm not sure. A syngonium. Another one with some nice little ears at the top there. Something that we're more accustomed to being a weed in our trees around here. And syngonium again. Here we've got the adenoma again with the spiny trunk. Personally, I just can't quite see how they lump all these things in together when you've got that epiphytic species sitting on the ground with wonderfully coloured leaves, and then we've got this spiny plant here. Not even sure what genus this is. Probably looks like a syngonium. Dieffenbachia. Very difficult to separate these two genera, Stenospermation and Rhodospatha. The Stenospermations tend to have a spiral growth habit, but it's difficult to actually determine that when you see them growing up a trunk. So whether these are Stenospermations or Rhodospatha is yet to be determined. Amazing growth habit, how they grow out and then have that fan of leaves. This one I initially thought was a Rhodospatha, but may in fact even be a philodendron in consulting with some people. This is on Sarohepi again. That just shows you the structure. Emergent new leaf. Those overlapping petioles at the base there give you a nice attractive pattern. This is in central Panama. Again, quite a wet area. The scrub is rather low, and this is in one of the places where you also find Zamia pseudoparasitica growing in low trees, as opposed to in western Panama where you find it growing in trees that are hundreds of meters high. Probably a Stenospermation. There's the inflorescence. You can sort of see a bit of that spiral growth pattern there, looking down on it from that direction. Probably Rhodospatha. The two palms in the background, for those that are interested in palms, is thought to be Bactris militaris. So the image of militaris that you see in the old palms of the world is much bigger than that. This is definitely Stenospermation. inflorescence with a set seed. All right, back onto some anthuriums. Superficially, it looks like Panamens, but it's actually probably a different species. Again, the same here. Anthurium valens. This again is from Hefe. Unidentified anthurium. Yeah, Cerocapunens. Thanks. This may be Anthurium colonicum. This is in the Anthurium ocreatum complex. Again, one of those rosette species that we've yet to put some names on. A baby Panamens. So when you're in the field, always try and get a photo of the inflorescence and a photo of the back of the leaf. That's why there's these odd photos in here, trying to demonstrate some of the features which help people identify them in the future. This is thought to be related to gracile, sorry. It's got that same inflorescence, but as you can see, the leaf is much more heavily veined. The same again. And when you look at that photo there, you know, there's your central anthurium that we're talking about, but on the left is another species, Philodendron down below. As you can see, the place is just dripping with water. Yes, this is probably at about 1,200 meters or something like that. And the color is related to the fact of use of the slide, because it can be very dark in some of these forests, especially if it's a cloudy day. This again, this is probably Anthurium subsignatum. Again, another one of the rosette species. I quite like all these grouping myself with their textured leaves and structure. As you can see, there's a seed head down there at the bottom of the page, all green. Anthurium fatoens. When you grow it in cultivation, you get quite a magnificent root display. Inflorescence. Another one of the rosette species. And yet another. And yet another. This is an embankment, totally covered. Philodendron down in the left bottom corner. That anthurium there has quite thin leaves, but nonetheless, it's growing right out in bright light. Again, another species that looks superficially like Panamens. Again, debatable, probably Panamens. Probably not Panamens. As you can see, a little bit more velvet, not as many veins. Wonderfully intense red. Anthurium panamense, a baby panamense, Bakerite, at this stage unidentified, juvenile of the same. Often when you're collecting in the forest, you'll see a juvenile and get excited at the texture of the leaf and one thing and another, and then subsequently find the adult. As you can see, there's several juveniles there on the ground, up in the top left, mid right, and in the centre of the image. This is probably the adult plant. No one's been able to put a name on this. This is perhaps, one of my, what I would think is one of the more desirable anthuriums. Great texture, bullate leaf, plenty of veins, nice and thick leaf. And that's the inflorescence. There's a lot of insect nabbage to plants there, and often, especially with seed, it's already half eaten and one thing and another. So there's a lot of pressure on plants from the natural enemies. One of the little climbing species. Unremarkable, but you've got to understand that not everything is full of beauty and veins and wonderful inflorescences. Yet again, another rosette species with lots of impressed veins. And here's one that's been in cultivation for a while, Ravenii. I think I even saw one on the sale table. Again, if you have difficulty growing it in the pot, try it on the tree. And there's an Anthurium clavigerum there in the background on the left. Anthurium from the Bolochium complex. It's thought that the inflorescence like that with the spathe on the top gives it some protection from the weather, which allows some pollination to occur. Philodendrons now in central Panama. This may well be in the wrong place. This may well be a monstera, and the new leaf is rather gorgeous. It may be an immature plant, which is why the diagnosis of the species is a little, or even the genus is a little difficult. But whether it turns out to be a philodendron or monstera is yet to be determined. And there's the new red leaf on the fern as well. Rosette philodendron. Just demonstrating the back of the leaf of another species. Philodendron tripartitum, an obvious name for the leaf shape. Again, another unidentified species. Oops, jumping all over the place. This is Michael Cologne, who I was in Panama with. He's a one of the main cycad taxonomists working out of Montgomery in Miami, with a very obvious philodendron there, which I'm sure everyone knows the name of. The inflorescence emerging. Just to give you a little size picture there. A juvenile. another unidentified species as yet. This is in central Panama, in an area where we were looking at Zamia imperialis, fantastic, very large growing species. If you look in the background there, again, you can see Garriganums up there on a tree. It's quite a rich little area, but only a very small patch of scrub where this was. It's near a mine. When I went back a couple of years later, it was nearly all destroyed and full of bloody Coke bottles and all the rest of it. So, you know, it doesn't matter where it is, the world continues to consume its own rainforests. Be a wonderful addition to horticulture if we could grow that. Again, another philodendron. Anyone want to have a punt? Don't embarrass yourself, Michael. Try again. Second guess. Rhodospatha. So this is a bulbous aroid. There's a whole little suite of them. You know, when I say a whole little suite, maybe 15 to 20 species. Tom Croat and Lynn Hannon dumped all these into the same species in Panama, but probably not quite correct. They don't dump them all in Rhodospatha croatiana. As you can see, philodendron there underneath, and to the left as well. These come with velvet leaves and spots, and there's a whole range of Rhodospathas, particularly rich in Ecuador and Colombia. It's a wonderful little genus. Although they look rather fragile, they're not too difficult to maintain. There's the inflorescences down the bottom. Again. And again, if you get the opportunity to travel and take photos, make sure you sort of try and get some of the photos like this, rather uninteresting aesthetically, but they do allow people to make species determinations. Another species of Rhodospatha. So on the Atlantic coast, we went to this area, which was quite difficult to get to. It was quite wet. The only vehicles that got in were those jacked up super four-wheel drive, incredibly rutted roads. And in the background there, you can see a cone on Zamia imperialis. So strangely enough, Anthuriums and other Aroids often grow on Zamia trunks. And so you can kill two interests in one go. Anthurium trisectum. Anyone want to have a punt at the genera that you can see there? And again, Michael? That's it. And a Rhodospatha. Yeah, Adenoma and Spirae. A fantastic thing. And there is someone in the room that's crossed that with Adenoma wallichiana. Rhodospatha. The trisectum again. And this one here, named after the helicona. This is Rhodospatha caribea. This grows just near a rubbish dump near Bocas del Toro that was loaded with a little insect called chigua, which buries under the skin, not unlike scabies, where you're destined to itch for months. And no matter what toxin you put on yourself, you can barely get rid of it. So it's especially dangerous for those that have got to crouch down to take a pee. Can itch in some awful places. Just demonstrating the fertile area there on that inflorescence at the front. As you can see, it migrates, I think it migrates downwards in Rhodospatha, which is quite different. Rhodospatha sagittifolia. This is the one with the classic twisted flower, black on the twisted inflorescence, sorry, black on the outside, white on the inside. There you go, there's a better picture of the inflorescence. So as you know, this is the South American equivalent to Cytosperma. Spathiphyllums also found there. This is Anthurium pacificum. Rightio, recently been divided or, distinguished from Clydemoides. As you can see, the leaves are considerably larger than Clydemoides, and the height the plant grows is much higher. So a little run through some salt-tolerant aroids of Bocas del Toro. This image here was taken from a boat where we're trying to get up on these rocks, which one of my friends eventually did because there was a new species of Zamia up there, Zamia nisophila. But here we've got a big bird's nest and some philodendrons. You can see peperoniums there. And that's the sea there, right directly underneath. So the waves crash on all these things. This is just back off the beach, Anthurium radiatum. Sorry, philodendron. And you can see a second species there beside it. There's the radiatum again. Montrichidia arborescens. Good arrow-shaped leaf, but a little bit vigorous. Yet to be identified monstera. And philodendron. And philodendron again. As you can see, they all grow together there. And just to show you the richness of the place, here we've got Helicona murrayi towering over radiatum. There's similar, this philodendron looks very similar to some that were collected in Ecuador in the past, but unable to put a species name on this. Anthurium's growing in this area here, so on a high tide, there's actually salt water covering the bottom of that plant. And here it is growing with with Zamia nisophila, the syngonium. Again, the salt water inundates this area. We're now getting to the rich end of the deal, and this is western Panama, so this is up towards the Costa Rican border. A lot of these plants grow at 1,200, 1,500 meters. It's a little bit cool, it's very wet. Whoops. And there's one of everyone's favourites. They don't look like they do in the greenhouse. But Anthurium wendlingeri, and this is the wide version. Anthurium madisonianum, it's got that characteristic inflorescence there. Very long central lobe, very epiphytic. Great new leaf. You can see the inflorescence on the right there. Anthurium formosum. Unidentified species. Again, another rosette species. There's quite a collection of these there. Panamensis is quite widespread in the central and eastern portions. Here you can see the insect damage. And, you know, a slightly different form, certainly not as veined, a little bit wider, more open superior lobes. A juvenile, sort of got that more narrower leaf. Another one of the thin leaf species of Anthurium there. Genome is to the left and in the inferior area. Anthurium antonianum, you know, for those people that like a bit of a red sinus, or maybe an inflorescence, would be very attractive to hummingbirds. You might notice the red cap, rightio. The reason for the red cap is that when you wear a red cap into the bush, you'll sometimes hear this great buzzing noise and you think, you know, it's a killer bee or something like that. But if you look very carefully, next minute there's a hummingbird thinking that you've got a flower on your head going, "Arr." And, you know, I think it'd almost be worthwhile to pin a little flower to your hat, so then you get to see hummingbirds very close. You do see a lot of them, and some of the lodging places put out little feeders. They're incredibly hard to photograph. Anthurium panamensis again. Right, Anthurium pseudospectabile. These leaves can get meters in length. Many years ago, there was an Aroid conference in Townsville, and there were two plants sold there. One was Anthurium spectabile, and then there was another plant sold as Anthurium pseudospectabile. The Anthurium pseudospectabile sold at the Aroid conference was not Anthurium pseudospectabile. That has a treat petiole. The one sold has a ridge petiole. The leaves always hang down, they're never erect, and they're that dull, matty green colour. Should anyone actually be growing pseudospectabile in Australia, which looks like that, I'd love to see it and grow one myself. There's an inflorescence, but that seed is far from mature, even though it's orange. These are all found in eastern Panama. And as you can see, there's a trunk which doesn't look all that old, but it must obviously be old because those leaves there are meters long. Another species with a white spade. Not looking particularly attractive, but just to demonstrate that there are lots of species there. I think these are all in the formosum complex. Sorry. Yeah. So as you can see, when you see things in slightly different stages of development, you know, for people that identify things from photos, you can get confused. So you see it there and you think, oh, it's got a red spathe. Sorry, a white spathe and a red spadix. But as you can see, the immature one is, they're both white. An Anthurium in the Telemancy group. I tend to like these long, narrow-leafed species. A geonoma there to the left and to the right. Inflorescence coming out at you. And there it is there. Again, another species. And yet again, another unidentified one. Sorry. Quite an unusual seed structure there. on that inflorescence. And there is the inflorescence. Another small growing species, nice and compact for those that don't have a lot of room. Again, another species we haven't been able to put a name on. Some people have suggested this might be Hebatitatum, but again, that's debatable. But a wonderful looking plant. As you can see, the verrucosum up the top with the inflorescences there. Another species loaded with yellow seed. It can be very difficult in the forest to actually identify plants. First of all, you're generally overexcited, often a little anoxic because you've been climbing too many hills and you can barely get your breath. And you see something like this that's got leaves very similar in shape and texture to Antonianum, but doesn't have the red sinus. Sometimes things like red sinuses are only brought out by bright light, but sometimes it can be a completely different species, and sometimes you don't even realise till you're back home and looking through your photos and you think, oh God, that was a different thing. So it can be very difficult in the field identifying things. You can just see the inflorescence in the centre of this picture. Again, it's another end. And there we go, Antonianum. Wonderful sinus. There's the bud at the base. New red leaf. But again, no red sinus, so is it a different species? This is an Anthurium madisonianum growing on the ground, and it's growing next to Zamia lindleyi, which is a recently described species, quite rare, only found in this one area. You can see again another unidentified Anthurium there in the centre of the image at the top. Cyclanths. You know, the place is just dripping with interesting things. Madisonianum again, new leaf, hanging inflorescence there. Very, very red spadix. And a few seeds. Again, just trying to get a picture of that new leaf there with the light behind it. This is a species, you know, in showing these slides to people that have actually travelled extensively in Panama, none of them had actually ever seen this plant. So no species name is available. As you can see, there's a few little blurred spots on the image there, and that's because the place is just so dripping with moisture. It's very difficult to keep your camera gear dry. There's a walk called the 7th of November walk, and that climbs rather rapidly. And as you can see here, one of the Anthuriums that's been in cultivation for many, many years. Anthurium watermelonense. With an inflorescence. Another of the rosette species, but it actually grows on an upright stem. Anthurium arcuatum. These leaves can get up to 1 metre long. And it's got a little great, fantastic little inflorescence there. Strange that it should grow with watermelonense and have a black inflorescence. So obviously there's some pollinator there. that goes for that inflorescence colour. Another unidentified species. Looks a little bit superficially like Valence, but in a totally different area and a different altitude. That's just a little bit out of order. That's from the previous one. This is a wonderful species. This leaf can get quite long too. Great impressed venation. And there's our inflorescence with a little bit of pollen being produced. Same again. Oops, just go back a species. Again, another species that hadn't been seen before. Wonderful flaring posterior lobes there. And I showed this to someone, they thought it must have been come from Colombia, but no, this is up on the Costa Rican border. Very thin-leafed little Anthurium, this. Delicate thing. Again, another species. Almost fits the characteristic of being a pebble Anthurium, which are not uncommon in Ecuador and Colombia, but this is in eastern Panama. And again, the inflorescence. So with all these inflorescences, if anyone wants to have a crack at identifying some of these things, I'd always be happy to look at what they think. The inflorescence is what's probably giving this the name, longistipatum. And for those that like pendant anthuriums, this leaf's wet, so it doesn't have quite the right texture, but there's the texture. White central vein, superficially looks like pallidiflorum. Can get quite large, up to about 1 metre long. There's a long leaf there. It's a great species. Hopefully someone might have collected that. This group of anthuriums has always been a favourite of mine, Digitonervum. And many years ago, before we ever went to Panama, we were in Ecuador, and we got one which we used to call Ovartifolium, identified by Tom Croat, now found out to be Torto collectivum. This one is lenti. The leaf is a little stiffer than the one that we've grown in cultivation for a while. Here it is again. And they're growing out in sort of very low shrubby area with Cavendishias.
Full sun?
Full sun. Not that there's much sun there. It's very cloudy a lot of the time. That fern in the background there looks very similar to one that grows up in Wyambil. Right. And just to show you how moist the place is, the seed can fall on the leaf and germinate. Just to give you a size of one. Those others were in the sun. This one's out in the underneath the canopy. Inflorescence. Another unidentified anthurium. Again, inflorescence. I think these all belong to the Formosum complex. A little bit of a coloured spathe, well, you know, it's a white spathe, but gives people an opportunity for breeding there. Some are a little pinker than others. We're now in an island 60 kilometres off the coast of Panama, off Bocas del Toro, and they're growing on the beach. The leaf there is a recently described Zamia hammoni, but they're growing on the beach. We've got Frederick Stylii. So the waves and the salt, it's a very salt tolerant thing. Very wonderful little narrow leafed form of it. Sometimes they're a little wider than that. Inflorescence. Unidentified species, again growing on that island, on the beach, and looks like brownie eye. This is sort of growing in an area that's sort of not unlike the Everglades or that sort of thing, you know, sort of lots of limestone, salt water. Wide leaf form of baker eye. Gracile. Here's a few monsters for you. Wonderful inflorescence. Pollinators there on the spadix. You can see the perforations on the leaf there. This may be, I think, maybe Epipriminoides, but again, not clearly identified yet. This is my cycad collecting mate from Hawaii. Wonderful monstera. You can see the Philodendron verrucosum in the background there. Possibly the same species, but maybe a different species. They've been dividing these species up a lot, so the exact name's not possible at this stage. This apparently is actually a form of the common monstera. Again, this is out in the open. Deliciosa. Hard to believe for those of us that are so used to the round form that we grow here. Just there, 1 minute. I think I've got the name here. This is punctulata. So I'll just go back and show you the inflorescences again. So that's Monstera punctulata. The philodendrons. Again, not an identified species at this stage, but wonderful texture and colour. Squamicauli, very, very red hirsute petioles there. This is grown at the ranger station at Fortuna. I do believe Tom's publishing this one, but again, name not available at this stage. So we thought this might have been rugosum, but apparently it is the type form of verrucosum. The verrucosum that we all know is not like this, but this is very verrucosum was retypified when it was described because they didn't have the original, and this is very close, where this is found is very close to the type locality. So, you know, some of this stuff sometimes is a little bit hard to believe when you look at it, but that's what the botanists tell us. Fantastic new leaf. If you look back there, as you can see, the back of the leaf is red up there just to the left of the central leaf. Philodendron crassospathum. Reminds me of Philodendron rugosum. Again, another unidentified species. And again. Philodendron grandipes. Very attractive species. Another unidentified species, which superficially you'd think it was an Anthurium until you have a close look and see that there's no marginal vein. Again, growing in that very low forest. Just put this one in for interest. This is up on the Costa Rican border. They've cut a few bananas down, turned it into a raft, and off to market. It's amazing when you go to some of these countries and you can actually find what you might term a full-sized river where the water is still amazingly clear. You know, as opposed to all the major rivers on the east coast of Australia that just run brown all the time. It's a wonderful thing to see clear water coming out of the mountains. What's the species it is? Oh yes, Dracontium sprucianum. This is actually a highly variable species. When you look in the book, sometimes you'll see that sort of what you might call it, you know, reddish, brownish coloured spade. Sometimes that's black, but it does have that distinguishing white centre there to the centre of the spade. This is up on the Costa Rican border. A few little developing seeds there. Spathiphyllums. Wonderful to see these things flowering in the forest, even when the inflorescence is a little damaged. As you can see, we're sort of all there in mist and cloud forest, so it grows at quite altitude. Wonderful aroids there in the background on the left. Some Dieffenbachias. Dieffenbachia oerstedii. And Dieffenbachia crepipistillata. Crepipistillata.